Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they predictively got it absolutely correct. This is Tom Navolish, your host, and I am so delighted that you are with me here again this week. Pretty exciting to see all the various things that are happening in our nation and all of the different distractions that we are being just consumed with, and then all of the real issues that are hidden. And those distractions seem to overcome what has and is going on. Now, what I want to do today is take you through just some various interesting ideas here that I have in the outline at samueladamsreturns.net. You can see the full content of the blog post there, as well as all of the references that I always do for the program. So in this first segment, what I'm looking at discussing, going through, is suicide of thought. The suicide of thought. And just briefly to go through the education eugenics and what has happened with that over the last number of years. But as I begin with the blog post, if you will, the references for this week, I'm going to take you back through a little components there on that history of the communist plan. In the second segment, I want to talk about transgenics. Transgenics is amazing, and I'll cover this some more in the second segment as I was taking in, looking at what is happening in America with all of this trans, with all of these groups that are, quite frankly, I'll just call them what they have been since the fall of Adam and Eve, people that have been given over, as we're told in Romans, they're given over to their own lusts, to their own insanities. And I want to keep pushing on this. Well, not pushing, but I want to keep reminding you of what I put out a couple weeks ago in respect to God causing people to go mad. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Chesterton and what he has to say about eugenics, as well as, if you haven't seen it, San Diego County redefines what a woman is. Interesting. And then we'll close up the third segment with talking a little bit about the title for today's program, Remaking These United States. And I do have the full title at the blog, is Remaking These United States in the idea of transgenics. But I want to take and talk a little bit about China, and I'm definitely going to talk about Venezuela and introduce you to a program that Dinesh D'Souza did in his episode 330. His wife is Venezuelan. And I want to share with you my experiences in Venezuela, and that she has more recent information. But I'll tell you what, we are in the making, or in the remaking, of these United States, all the way through those socialist communist plans to the Venezuelan of America, making America into Venezuela. So we have a lot to cover, and I don't know that I'll get through it all, but what I wanted to do is take you back through a little bit of history, and so that you can look at the archives and you can download from the website at samueladamsreturns.net the Jan Kozak, what I have in there. Once again, this one's so pertinent, folks, that if you haven't delved into it, you're never going to get it. Okay, you're just never going to get it. But what he wrote is how Czechoslovakia was taken over without a shot being fired, without a shot fired. And we're seeing that. And in addition to that, what Alexander Sobolev wrote in 1956 on something that he gave as a lecture on some forms of transition from capitalism to socialism. So what we have, quite frankly, is with all of this so-called cultural revolution, with all of these various cultural issues that are going on, they're sideshows in so many different ways. And once again, it's the church, it is believers, are those that fundamentally understand the difference between good and evil, or should, that have allowed evil to prevail. And for the most part, it is the larger denominations that have allowed that to occur, and they have allowed for the suicide of thought. And that's what we're seeing so much right now, and to the extent that the Biden administration is now putting what I call a thought czar into place. And I have a reference there for you in regards to that. Oh, let's see, what are they calling the Biden disinformation czar? There's a really good link there in the references to a podcast from a gentleman from the Heartland Institute that did that. And just this whole idea of a disinformation or a thought czar that I sit there and I just go, come on, give me a break. Kind of reminds me of that one Sylvester Stallone movie. I can't remember the name of it, where he was put in deep freeze because he went after bad guys and all of that. And then they haul him out and, you know, he's using bad language all the time. And they take and they, you know, ding him all these credits. And here it was, the real people were underground, where you had this craziness all above ground. So it's kind of like what we have today. And we have all of these bad actors that are contrary to everything in our foundation. Just on this whole idea of suicide of thought. Chesterton, in his Orthodoxy, he writes this: there is a thought that stops all thought. And that thought is the only thought that ought to be stopped. That is the ultimate evil against which all religious authority was aimed. It only appears at the end of a decadent ages like our own. You got to remember, he wrote that a long time ago. And he continues to this: so one set of thinkers can, in some degree, prevent further thinking by teaching the next generation that there is no validity in any human thought. Boom. Right there. Okay. This is where we need to focus right now, because as we have seen on college campuses and now is being driven all the way down into preschool, is that, wait, you don't need to think. You know, there's no validity in human thought. There's no rationale in thinking about God. There's no rationale in thinking. So rationalization in its purest form is under attack with all that we'll be talking about, especially in the second segment on eugenics. The interesting aspect of all of this design to take in and remove good, solid thinking is to create none other than the various types of gnomes, like I talk about in last week's program, even the minions, you know, the yellow people with the blue coveralls, and they just run around, do whatever, in this case, the evil people want them to do. Now, I have to ask, and this is directed for all of those that have a faith in the living God. So what's going on from your pulpits in taking and discussing thought, discussing the truth, in seeking out the Lord according to biblical standards? And then in relationship to that, what I really want to know is I would like to know from you, and you can email me at tom@samueladamsreturns.net if you want to, but I want to know from you, especially as a real Christian, what does it mean to take and be a leader? What does it mean to take and be involved in what our founders expected every one of us to be involved in? So I'm going to continue that question with, remember, as you go to correspond with me, is that James Madison and John Adams said that this Constitution is only for a what? Moral and religious / virtuous people, not for anybody else. So why do you think they're attacking our Constitution? Because the moral, virtuous, and religious people are not involved. You're not involved. Oh, but Tom, we elect people to office. We're involved. We go and we vote. That's not involvement. And so if you're a parent and you end up going to, a school board meeting, and you say, hey, wait a minute, what is that book or list of books that you're trying to feed my children? You're trying to take and embed into their minds? What do you mean, asking my child, are you a boy or a girl today? Oh, you can be whatever you want, and you don't have to tell your parents. Your parents don't know anything. And oh yeah, all that religious stuff, forget it. Forget it. You don't have to. Wait a minute. That's what they're saying. Forget it. You don't have to think about it. Interesting. So where are you with that? And where are the pulpits? You see, in your church, if you're not studying the Constitution of these United States as intended by the founders, and even more importantly at this time, for the reasons of federalism, if you're not studying your state constitution, then you got bad theology. Really bad theology. What do you mean? What's that got to do with anything theological? As I always say, God's government is starting with self-government, but in this nation, the gift of self-governing has been given to us. And the only way to properly exercise that is not just going to the voting booth whenever an election comes up. No, it's getting into knowing how your government should operate. Because for the most part, it's not. So I highly challenge you as we close out this first segment is to read what I opened up with as far as Kozak and Sobolev, and that you download those and go through them. Then you need to take and find out and formally push your pastors and your church leadership to have constitutional classes there at your church, both federal and state, because that's what Sam Adams and the Anti-Federalists expected, is that if you were not being inculcated with the truth of the gospel and the truth of self-government, then you would have no truth at all. And what you would see is eugenics in education and what? The suicide of thought. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it correct, and this is Tom Navolis, your host. And as I wanted to continue on, from the last segment, I talked about the suicide of thought. And in this segment, what I want to talk to you about a little bit more is transgenics. Now, when I started looking up this idea of eugenics in relationship to abortion, and even eugenics in relationship to all of this trans stuff that is going on all the way into our children, I was not surprised to see a lot of information on the abortion issue in relationship to eugenics, because there's many people over the course of all of the abortion time frame on Roe that have astutely talked about Margaret Sanger being a eugenicist, and that this was targeted towards Black people in particular because of where all of the Planned Parenthood, or a good portion, I'm not going to say all, let me retract that, but let's say a good portion of Planned Parenthood would place their slaughterhouses. Now, I got thinking about that a little bit more and going, okay, that makes all sense, and then, this whole idea of women taking and looking at it from my body, all of this individualism and that, it just sat there and it just kept grinding at me. And in conversations that I was having with a number of people, especially as we're looking at the mental health of children in public schools, this whole transitioning thing, the body destruction that happens when parents in particular, which I think is absolute child abuse, that put their kids on beta blockers or body blockers, or making genetic changes there, and what's going on with that, as well as then radical surgeries to destroy how these individuals were born. Now, the first premise that we have to nail down, and I'm sure everybody that listens to this program clearly understands, is that we are created individuals, male or female, period. That's it. God decided what we would be. And with that, we have to clearly understand, as we look at everything that I was talking about on the destruction of thought, is that, guess what? The philosophies that were coming in ancient times, as well as what came in the 1700s in particular, I'm sorry, but the reality, in fact, is that they don't believe in God. They don't believe in anything that is a religious idea that establishes the fundamentals of Judeo-Christianity and the whole concept of what is going on with Muslims. Now, what you have to clearly understand is that, and you probably do, this is godlessness that is happening out there. It's the whole fact that, as we talked about in the first segment, is that there is no more a thought. When prayer and Christianity was taking out of education, it's so contrary to what our founders said. Sam Adams said that what? We need to inculcate our children in the principles of the Savior, of the principles of what he was educated in. And we'll talk about that in a couple of moments here. But as we look at this whole idea of eugenics, not just in education on the dumbing down, the suicide of thought, we're seeing the suicide of our children because they do not know that they are created as a boy and a girl. They're being told that their bodies are irrelevant. So not only are their minds irrelevant, their bodies are irrelevant and can be swayed and designed and do whatever the gods of education want them to be and do. Now, I mentioned last week that this whole slippery slope began in these United States in the 1700s, the early 1700s, with Unitarianism coming in. And what we saw is that not only were there the changes in religion, in Christianity, and even Catholicism in Europe, that came over into these United States, and more so in the 19th century, in those 1800s, the whole idea of eugenics came about. Now, just on a quick history of that, is that the person that this Francis Galton, who was really the one that was popularizing the idea of eugenics, especially in England, this guy was a cousin of Darwin. And in 1883, a year after Darwin's death, Galton gave his research a name, eugenics. And he was all about, we have to take and, promote the best in humanity. And there were all sorts of evils and insanities that were going on, both in the Eugenics Education Society in 1907, and then what happened in American Eugenics Society by 1921. So what I wanted to just bring to you is a couple ideas, again, from Chesterton, of all people. Where were all of the Christian pastors fighting and talking against this? Where was it that we were electing and having judges where Darwin should have, the whole idea of the monkey trial down there in Kentucky should have failed. But no, people did not have good theology to be on that jury in such a manner that we would stand on our factual faith issues and tradition. All right, I'll back down a second here. Chesterton wrote in his pamphlet book, if you will, Eugenics and Other Evils. Evil always takes advantage of ambiguity. We see that in everything that's going on out there, even this change in definition of a woman in San Diego County. He goes on, is that, Chesterton, that is, he says, I know that it means very different things to different people, but that is only because evil always takes advantage of that ambiguity. I know it is praised with high profession of idealism and benevolence, with silver-tongued rhetoric about pure motherhood and happier posterity. But that is only because evil is always flattered, as with the Furies were called the gracious ones. I know that it numbers many disciples whose intentions are entirely innocent and humane, and who would be sincerely astonished at my describing it as I do. But that is only because evil always wins through the strength of its splendid dupes. And there has, in all ages, been a disastrous alliance between abnormal innocence and abnormal sin. Of these who are deceived I shall speak, of course, as we all do, of such instruments, judging them by the good they think they are doing and not by the evil which they really do. But eugenics itself does exist for those who have sense enough to see that ideas exist. And eugenics itself, in large, guarantees or small coming quickly or coming slowly, urged from good motives or bad, applied to thousands of people or applied to three. Eugenics itself is a thing no more to be bargained about than poisoning. You see, this whole idea of trans and transgenderism and what it does inside of our children in particular, they're not getting a choice when it's being pushed in school. This bill that happened in Florida and now what we have in Ohio, talks about kindergarten to third grade. And still in third grade, I know of young people in seventh grade. And it is a disaster, especially when puberty is absolutely kicking in and the way that our modern educational system is designed to take and cause more problems with adolescents than helping them through it in a mature and biblical fashion, helping them understand who they are in Christ, in the development of who they are as people that are what? That are taken and created in the image of God. But no, the gods with the blue hair, the purple hair, the green hair, the mishmash colored hair, whatever it is, with the rings through their everywhere, no, they are the gods in the classroom. They are the gods that these kids look up to, and they're told that parents do not matter. Parents, they will take and only hold you back from all that you can be. We will liberate you. We will tell you what to think. That's what we have going on in education. And that's why when parents go to the boards of education and they take in are considered now terrorists because they want to hold truth and principle in light. Oh, my friends, there's just so much here that we can just continue to talk about in this whole idea of trans and what it is, and the whole idea of the self-identity across a range of gender identities. What? Terminology and culture. This is from the Eugenics Archive in Canada site, and it just goes on and on and on about talking about these types of things. One area that I was taking and trying to really pull together was in Psalms. I highly recommend that people take and go look at Psalms 80, 81, and 82, even to the extent what happens is that, God takes and judges. He says, "Who are you, you little gods?" He talks about this in Psalm 81, where just real quickly, this is you're crying out for repentance, and he just admonishes the people. He says, "Oh, hear, O my people, and I will admonish you, O Israel, if you will listen to me. There shall be no foreign god among you, nor shall you worship any foreign god." Now, wait a minute. We're doing that all within our own context. We're making individuals to be God. We're making all of what? The insanities that we talked about. He goes through in Psalm 82 and just hammers on that idea of even judgment. You know what? Sam Adams, the Anti-Federalists, clearly understand that this is the destruction, the moral destruction of a nation. So come on back in the last segment as we continue with Sam Adams and those anti-federalists. They did. They got it right, and hopefully you will when we finish with more of our programs. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. They did. They got it right. There's a couple of things I just want to just close up real quick in talking about the last segment, and that as I took you through on the eugenics, there's just no way we could take enough time. But when you think about it, is that taking and destroying our children by destroying or eugenics of education, meaning changing it such a way that thought is destroyed, that you're only what those indoctrinations that are happening are destroying our youth, that are killing them, that are driving them, in my opinion, and well-studied opinion that's out there. You go figure that one out for yourself. I'm not going to give you the references on that, but it's there, right out of the CDC, talking about suicide in all of our youth is driven from these ideas of what happened with this so-called pandemic, the Chi-Com flu, and even more so with this gender dysphoria. And because we're not giving kids the answers that are biblically sound, hey, I'll just always bring it back to, you know what, it has to come from the pulpits properly, theologically, Reformation, biblically minded, that take and talk truth. So all I have to say is that in finishing up and rounding out that second segment is that back in 1927, Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes spoke wrongly, in my opinion, about eugenics in a Supreme Court decision that happened in his court. And he said this: 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. That's why he was for eugenics. And at that time, it was sterilizing people that were called imbeciles, and for a lot of different reasons. Now we're sterilizing our children for the sake of gender identity, not as imbeciles. But you know what I say in this, he was absolutely wrong for using that. But in the destruction of thought, I guess Oliver Wendell Holmes wasn't too far off in talking about 3 generations of imbeciles that we have in education and in the bureaucracies and in government. Elected on top of that. Worse, the imbeciles that are at the pulpits. And that includes all of the various deacons and elders that are imbeciles for not taking God's word and living on it every day in every area of life. Well, here we go, all the way back to our present time, and the fact that what we have is religious demonstrative movements that are little g gods, that are people who think they're gods. Well, we look at that all the way into what I wanted to talk about in this segment, in the remaking these United States in the image of Venezuela and China. Now you have to understand that Venezuela is in bed with China, somewhat with Russia, but they really grabbed onto that Chinese Belt and Roads money. And I have to ask you to go to the link at samueladamsreturns.net and look at the what I have there from Dinesh D'Souza and his wife talking about the podcast or a program that she was on down there in Venezuela. I can tell you from my personal experiences in Venezuela in particular, is that all the promises, all the promises that we hear out of the Biden administration are no different than the rants and ravings that I used to hear from Chavez when I was in Venezuela a number of times. Although Chavez, he took and, oh, wait a minute, Chavez would rant about the evil United States. Huh. Isn't that what we get out of all of the leftists in the Biden administration? How terrible the United States is? So I'm going to put a bracket right here. And I hope you carefully listen to what I'm going to say. As I mentioned in the first segment, a little bit in the second segment, you need to be teaching your state and federal constitution at your churches. Here's why. Very simply, is that the Biden, and I'll say it correctly, the Biden administration is in absolute violation of the federal Constitution, and yet nobody's doing anything about it. What do you mean, Tom? He's allowing invasion to happen. He's violating numerous aspects of our Constitution and Bill of Rights. But because we don't know what our rights are, nor do we know how our Constitution is supposed to function, we have allowed the Venezuelan takeover, the Chinese takeover of our constitutional republic. Now, there's a long story on this that I don't want to really try and take the time to get into, but I found a very interesting article that popped up into my email this week, and I really thought that somehow or another you need to really understand what it has to say, if and when I can get there. But the idea is that Congress is culpable in all of this. Congress is culpable in all of this is because, once again, you do not understand what it is that is required to take and elect good foundational people to office. And your pulpits are not producing those people to go to office. Anyway, I'm on a rant this week only because I have been very bothered by what's been going on in relationship to all that this administration has been foisting on us, and the way that these midterm primary elections have been going, to the extent that I sit here and I shake my head, and that you don't know how to vet candidates. You don't know how to find the right candidates. And worse, we're not developing the right candidates. So, I don't know. I guess I just have to leave it with the ideas that you don't want it. You don't want liberty. You don't want this. You're down that. I guess I go down to the sitting on the roof idea, waiting for God to rescue and rapture people out of the world and to take them, from all of that which is happening. And I'm sorry, but that's not Reformation thinking. And we need to be fighting. I always say very simply is that I cannot imagine Jesus coming back for a bride that is so filthy, dirty, and ugly. Anyway, that's just the whole perspective that I have on what is occurring right now. So as we take and we try to ascertain all that is going on in relationship to Congress undermining the whole federalism, constitutionalism, they are. And we've been allowing that. And so the complacency that we have there is that I can take, again, if you understood anything about how our Constitution is supposed to function, you would clearly say with me and be as frustrated as I am today with this whole thing that we need to do something. Oh, really? What is it that we need to do? What we need to do is, yes, we have to go out and vote, but we have to vet those candidates. We have to understand that they are going to stand on the moral grounds that our founders wanted us to have. An article in the Daily Signal is the one that I was looking for, and it was talking about the American Republic and how the founders created it in such a way that we would have federalism. But as I've always talked about, the anti-federalists have predicted that we would have the types of people in Congress that we have right now, and that what we would see is Hamilton's idea of a consolidated federal government come to fruition. And it is, but it's not coming to fruition in a way that Hamilton expected. Instead, we have the implementation of the globalists, we have the implementation of the corporatist, the socialist, and flat out the communist. We only have a few minutes left, ladies and gentlemen, and I somewhat apologize that I have been exercising myself the way that I have. But you need to understand, when you look at history, even just into the late 1800s, early 1900s, with the likes of Chesterton, you don't know that history. And our children don't know that history, only just 100 and some years ago. They don't know that history. So instead, their minds are being torn apart, and their emotions are being destroyed, and their very soul is being destroyed. A little story regarding Lexington. You know, those people there at Lexington refused to put their arms down. They refused to obey. Then the order was given. 8 citizens were killed and many wounded. The war for liberty began. The Americans had, quote, put the enemy in the wrong. The regulars, the British Army, fired first. Lexington's sad green was stained with the first blood of the Revolution. But as the firing was heard by those 2 escaping men, Adams stopped, threw up his arms, and exclaimed in a voice of patriotic rapture, "Oh, what a glorious morning for America this is!" It was that glorious morning, for it witnessed the display of great moral sublimity in the stand these few noblemen took, believing themselves to be in the right against the greatest power on the globe. Where is our moral sublimity? Where is yours? Where is yours? And will you stand up in the right of God before Him against the greatest power on the globe, including all of the changing of America with transgenics? I really ask you to go look at SamuelAdamsReturns.net and what is there and the references for this program, I ask you that if there's anything meaningful here, that you would donate to the program. You'll find a link there to do that. So come on back next week when Samuel Adams does return. See you then.